So for me, psychedelics, although Huxley called them a door of perception, I think of it more as a window rather than a door, because you can look through it, but you can't really go there and stay there with psychedelics. You always come down. And depending on your level of spiritual maturity, a psychedelic worldview or a psychedelic epiphany or a psychedelic way of seeing things, the aha, the relaxation, the love, whatever it might be, will fade if the soil, the ground is not fertile for it to spring roots. And so that's a matter of your spiritual maturity. It's sort of like the difference between, let's say, a 12-year-old, with a magic wand having a spiritual experience versus a 70-year-old. It falls on different receptive ears or fertile ground. So anyway, so for me, psychedelics are a window. You can see through. You can't go there. And meditation is what builds the door, where it takes a while, but you can walk through it and you can go there. Another analogy with psychedelics is that we're climbing up a mountain and we want to get to the peak, but it's very cloudy. It's very foggy. Not so foggy that you can't see your foot in front of you. You can, so you don't stumble, but you can't see the peak. And after a while, you begin to wonder whether there is a peak at all after all. Well, psychedelics, in a way, can part the clouds temporarily, and you can see the peak. And then, psychedelics fade and the clouds come back, but you're heartened. And then you take the day-to-day, the step after step, which is meditative practice, to try to root it. This is one of the 10 lessons of psychedelic psychotherapy that I had talked about. What I've found in my own reading is that in clinical practice, over the last 50, 60 years, we've come up with certain truths, certain methodologies of practice that tend to work. It's an old story that in the old days, in the 40s and 50s, they would strap subjects down to a gurney in a psychiatric ward and inject them with high dose of LSD, and then, of course, no wonder they had a terrible experience. They called it now a psychotomimetic because it mimicked psychosis. Well, no wonder. But over time, naturally, the learning emerged that the environment, the setting, was very, very important. And so we now, in our clinical practice, have comfortable settings with couches and flowers and things like that. So we've learned that over 50 years. But and we've learned lots of things like that. There's a whole bunch of lessons that we've learned in our Western clinical practice. And in each case, it occurs to me that those methodological lessons learned are, in essence, reinventions, rediscoveries of tribal practice, of hard-won tribal knowledge that emerged over the centuries. So the example of having a pleasant setting, well, the tribal environment, the natural world, a relaxed family environment for one's use of visionary plants in that setting, mirrors the subsequent Western rediscovery of that fact. Mindset, your attitude. Again, the tribal attitude is one that's receptive. Setting we talked about, the dose, the amount, the pharmacology. The tribal peoples were well aware of those sorts of the entire pharmacopoeia of plants out there and which to combine and how much to use. So once again, Western discovery mirrors hard-won tribal knowledge, and then things like. In the West, it's become apparent that one's psychedelic epiphanies don't last unless, when you have reentry, that you have a supportive spiritual community of some sort. The hippies learned that with communes and eventually getting back to the land and getting away from the cities because they wanted an environment that was conducive and supportive to their psychedelic insights. That's something that you see, of course, in the tribal environment, a supportive spiritual practice. There's no negative judgment of the use of those visionary plants. It's incorporated into the spiritual practice and the whole heritage of the tribe. Not just a supportive spiritual community, but a spiritual practice of some sort. And so we've discovered over time that meditation helps give root to the psychedelic insights. Well, in the tribal environment, again, they knew that. And it's interesting to think about how that tribal knowledge was acquired. And, I think of the Western scientific method as being comparing conditions simultaneously. with a control as well, and seeing what happens over one step of time. And I see this sort of tribal approach as taking that and making it vertical, so that instead of comparing things simultaneously, they compared them sequentially. So try this for 100 years and see what happens, and try this for the next 100 years. And over the course of 2,000 years, you've compared a variety of approaches. So it's kind of like serial experimental method. It has its own validity, and the findings that have come out, it's not surprising that Western practice would rediscover findings that are honed in the tribal sort of vertical or sequential over time, clinical practice.